Welcome to See by Starlight, where we survey the celestial symbols that forge the forms of our vitality. I'm Abigail Joy, your host, as we ply the past and present, hurtling into the horizons of horary and holistic health astrology. I am not a licensed medical professional. Do not take what I say as medical advice. Hi everyone, welcome to the third episode of the See by Starlight podcast. I'm very excited to share this one with you. We have a guest today. Her name is Grace, and she was the winner of this month's drawing to appear on the podcast. If you are interested in appearing on the podcast and getting a free reading in the process, just go to my website, www.seebystarlight.com, and click on the podcast tab and you will see how to enter the drawing. Before we start, I just want to make a quick note. I love doing this podcast and it's free for everybody, and I hope that everyone can learn a lot from it about astrology and about natural health. And I love listening to podcasts, but I hate when they have ads. So I really want to keep my podcast ad-free if possible, but it does cost money to produce. The service that I'm using deletes the episode after 90 days unless I upgrade to the premium level, which is $12 a month. So I would love it if I could get some supporters for the podcast so that I can at least break even and get my podcast to a place where the episodes aren't deleted every month. So if you want to support my podcast, if you like what you're hearing and you think this is important work, please help me continue doing it by joining my membership. So you can go to my website, again, that's www.seebystarlight.com, and look for a green button that says join the membership. There are different membership levels. They start at just $3 a month and they go up from there. I do have lots of perks for each of the membership levels. So you wouldn't just be helping me produce this podcast, but you'd also be getting something in return. So if I could get just a few membership signups this month so that I could pay to upgrade to the premium podcast, I would absolutely love that. So if you could go to my website, sign up for membership, let's see if we can do this so that I can at least break even as I'm producing this content for you all. I really believe that the podcast is just going to get better and better as we go along. I'm working on improving my presentation skills and my public speaking skills. So hopefully as we go along, they will be more interesting to listen to. And I do know that for sure the content is always going to be really exciting and interesting astrologically and herbally. So if you could join my membership, that'd be great. All right, thank you so much. And now let's get into the conversation with Grace. Today we have Grace on the podcast, and you gave me your chart, your natal chart information, and said that you might be interested in talking about endometriosis. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So before we jump in, do you want to say anything about your journey so far or your chart?
Yeah, I can speak to my journey. So I'm an astrologer too, and it's interesting. I don't look at my chart from a medical perspective. I know a few things, and I've read a couple of books to try to piece some things together myself, but I'm really curious to see what you get from my chart as far as endometriosis and compare it to my own notes to see like, okay, maybe if something is here, because again, I'm not a medical astrologer. I know that you can look at the chart to see different ailments, see everything about your physicality and whatnot, but I just want to get a different perspective on something like that. And then as far as my journey with endometriosis and my health, I'm currently 26 years old. I got my surgery when I was 24. And I noticed that I had issues with my feminine period when I was about, I will say I've always had painful periods. I've always had difficulties, even dating back to like middle school and high school. There would be at least once a month during my cycle, I was missing school. And because it was so painful, couldn't deal with it. So when I was about 8, and I got on birth control really young to try to help with the symptoms and things like that. But when I turned 18, me and my mom decided that I could try the IUD. So we got on the IUD. It was, the doctor told me it was supposed to take like 6 months to see if it was going to work well with my body or not. Didn't work good at all. Took it out. And I noticed shortly after that I started to have a lot of pain. Like I would, of course, painful periods. I would notice that I'd be cramping and having discomfort even when I wasn't on my cycle. I had pain during sex, nausea, pretty much every symptom that you can look up endometriosis and all the symptoms. And I had them, and I went to the doctor and I'm like, I think something's wrong. And they're like, no, it might be IBS, or it might be this, or it might be that. And everybody knows that as a woman, it's not likely to be heard when you're trying to see medical things. And then on top of that, I'm a Black woman, so people really aren't listening to me. So it's difficult. And I told my doctor when I was like 20, I don't even remember how old I was. I told her, I think I was like 20. I told her, like, I'm pretty sure I have endometriosis. They're like, no, you don't. Lo and behold, problems keep coming. I've gotten all the MRIs. It literally took them an MRI to figure out that I had endometriosis. And by the time they did the MRI, it was so bad, to the point that, like, you shouldn't even be able to see something like that on an MRI. Typically, when they test for endometriosis, and I know I'm going to mispronounce this word because I always do, but I think it's a laparoscopy or something like that. But that's just, that's the procedure that I ended up getting done in the end to remove all of cysts and stuff. But the fact that they could see that on my MRI was alarming. I went to a doctor just to get my yearly checkup, and he was like, so when are you going to get the surgery? Because you have one of the worst endo cases I've ever seen. Oh. And I'm like, only if y'all would have listened to me years ago.
I know.
Like, it's like, it's been a stressful journey, but luckily I got the surgery. It's not totally gone away, because as I told you, like, endometriosis is not something that has a cure. Like, it's pretty much just get on birth control, do this, do that to fix it. But it definitely has gotten better since I've had my surgery, coming up on 2 years ago now. But it's been a journey.
Oh yeah, I'm so sorry. I hear this all the time. And I've experienced it myself, as far as the whole doctors are like, no, you don't. You're fine. It's in your head. Maybe go on an antidepressant. Like, it is so frustrating. It is so frustrating. And I'm so sorry, but I'm really glad that you found some relief. Let's, before we jump into the astrology, just give the audience kind of a science lesson on what endometriosis even is, because people might not know. So starting with the anatomy, the uterus has an inner lining called an endometrium. It grows inside the uterus every month. It's tissue that's very rich in blood. It grows and grows, and then every month at menstruation, it sheds. It is released from the uterus, and that's what we call our period. And it's important to note that the endometrium is tissue. It's not blood, it's tissue, right? And it's very biologically active. The job of the endometriosis is to actively provide life and nourishment to a developing fetus if you get pregnant, right? I think of it as like charged. I kind of think of it as like energetically charged. It has a purpose. It's not just blood that's just kind of passively sitting there, right? So endometriosis is a disease where the endometrial cells that make up the tissue of the endometrium, grow outside of the uterus instead of inside of it. So they could start growing in the outside of the uterus itself.
I had my fallopian tubes. A part of my surgery, they were nervous that they were going to have to cut one of my fallopian tubes, because they ended up finding like a big blockage of cysts in there when they did do my surgery.
That's crazy. But yeah, it can grow in any organ. It's not just the outside of the uterus. It can spread, like it can grow like any other random organ of your body. And once it starts growing, it forms they call them lesions. They're like tumors. They grow on the outside of your organs where they're not supposed to be, and that can cause serious pain. Not to mention, it can hinder the function of the actual organ that it's kind of latched onto. So pain is a huge problem with endometriosis. And sometimes It is just extremely painful periods. Like you mentioned, it started in middle school where your periods were so terrible that you couldn't go to school some days. But for a lot of people, the pain spreads to throughout the rest of the month, not just the week of your period. As far as the spread of the disease, sometimes in advanced cases, these lesions can grow so much that they actually fuse organs together, which obviously is very bad because these organs need to do their jobs and they're like stuck to each other with these lesions, and it can hinder the proper functioning of these organs. So this is a very serious disease. It's not something that I just hate that doctors are like, oh, whatever. Like it's not a whatever kind of thing. You need to take it seriously. Now, science right now doesn't know the exact cause of the disease. We do know a lot of inputs to it. So one is that it's correlated with and exacerbated by excess levels of estrogen in the body. It also has a genetic component. There are certain genes that are more strongly tied to people who develop endometriosis. But that doesn't mean if you have those genes, you're guaranteed to get it. So, genetics can be kind of a weird field like that. It's also associated with environmental toxins, especially the what we call the endocrine disrupting toxins, like plastics, pesticides, things that affect estrogen production will have downstream effects on like all of our other hormones. And then they've also discovered a microbial connection, like a gut biome kind of thing connection as well. But right now, like I said, science isn't really fully sure of the exact causes. They just kind of have all these different pieces of the puzzle right now that I'm not really sure how to put them together, right? That's kind of how it's going. But endometriosis affects over 11 million women in the United States alone. Sometimes it can affect men too, which is a weird random fact. Like they can get, isn't that weird? It's very rare, but it does happen. Their bodies will suddenly start growing endometriosis cells. Like, what? You don't even have a uterus? But anyway, that's a weird random tidbit side note. And like you say, it often usually takes a really long time to diagnose because our medical system just doesn't consider menstrual pain to be a big deal, even though it absolutely is. If you have pain during menstruation, something is wrong. Pain is a signal that something's wrong. That is the function of pain in the body. It's not normal. It's not something that's just like, it's part of being a woman. No, pain is a signal that something's wrong. So we need to take it seriously. Like you also said, there's no cure for endometriosis. There are treatments. They have varying degrees of success. Hormonal treatments is something doctors often turn to, and for that, they're really their only tool is birth control. They don't really have a lot of other, like more natural, holistic tools related to hormonal health. And then, like in your case, if it gets really bad, surgery is required to remove those lesions. Sometimes people even get a hysterectomy to remove the entire organ altogether. So
I have a friend who just recently got a hysterectomy. She just turned 30 and she's been trying to get one for years, and they wouldn't even let her do one until she did turn 30. Yeah, they're like, do you want to have kids? Aren't you sure you don't want to have kids? And she's like, I would like to have kids, but I'd rather have a comfortable life so I can find other ways to have kids. Take my uterus out. And they gave her the hardest time.
It's your body, your choice, but no, they want to take that away from. Anyway, okay, yes. So let's move to the astrology. So astrologically speaking, what would I associate with endometriosis? I think a lot of people might first turn to the planet Venus because Venus in general rules the uterus and female problems in general. But actually, I would give it to the moon because the endometrium is strongly tied to the cycles of the moon. You think about it, the moon, waxes and wanes every month. It grows and then it releases. And that's what the endometrium does as well. It's inside of our uterus. It starts with a thin lining, it grows and grows, and then it sheds and sheds. And that's kind of a lunar type of energy. The moon is considered the mystical source of life. It's the sort of origin of the mystical sphere of our lives. And the moon is also all about nurturing and feeding life, just like the endometriosis, or the endometrium, in the womb will nurture and feed a fetus. So I think I would give endometriosis to the moon as a lunar disease. But there are other things involved as well. Whenever we talk about excess growth, I immediately think of Jupiter, right? Because Jupiter is a planet of expansion. Jupiter kind of always wants to grow and expand. And so when Jupiter gets kind of, we'll call it like the evil side of Jupiter, or when Jupiter isn't quite in its right space, it can cause excess growth, like tumors or tissue that's not supposed to be where it is, and it grows where it's not supposed to grow. So that's kind of what, associated with the endometriosis thing. And then the North Node also we think of as sort of like the continuous flow. So the North and South nodes, right? So the South Node is like the drain and the North Node is like the fountain. So we have like constant flowing up of the North Node and constant draining in the South Node. And so when I think of a disease about like too much growth, I'm thinking, I wonder if there's a North Node component to it, maybe. This is a possibility. And then another thing, as I was researching it, there's actually a really strong immune component to endometriosis. The growth of the endometrial tissues can overstimulate the immune system and can cause kind of an autoimmune response, which is really interesting. Here I am being a nerd. Oh, interesting. The immune system. Sorry.
Oh, I agree. I never knew that. And I'm over here taking notes. Like I'm just thinking about what you're saying.
Yeah. And I associate the immune system with Mars and Saturn because their jobs, they're the malefics, and their job is to defend us, right? And that's the immune system. So Saturn is about identifying what is self versus not self, because Saturn is at the outermost edge of our, the visible planetary spheres. And so it's like the boundary of what is in versus what is out. And so I think of Saturn as, like the white blood cells of the body. They have to identify, is this a good thing or is this a bad thing? Do I want to keep this as part of myself, or is this not self and I need to mark it as, hey, get rid of that? And then Mars, I think of as the attack part of our immune system. It's like, invader, attack, rah, fight it, get rid of it, And what is that primarily associated with? Inflammation, right? And Mars is a hot, fiery planet. So I think Mars is really strongly associated with that part of our immune system, attacking the invaders and creating fire and pain. Mars creates pain, and inflammation creates pain, and there's a very strong inflammatory component to endometriosis. So all of these things kind of working together. Astrologically speaking, whenever we're talking about any disease, we look at the sixth house. So we're getting more personal, like an individual chart. Sixth house in general rules illness. And the way I think of it as, I have to talk about these things really carefully because you don't want to freak people out, like saying, oh, you're going to get a disease because you have a sixth house. Everybody has a sixth house. Everybody gets sick. It's part of life, right? But we can kind of freak ourselves out. So the way I think about it is everyone has strengths and weakness. There's nobody in the entire world who is perfect in every single way, right? We all have organs that are stronger and work really well, and organs that are a little less optimal or efficient, and that's just life. It's the natural nature of things. And I think of the sixth house as kind of, this is a part of ourselves that's a little weaker. These organs represented by the sixth house aren't going to be as efficient or well-functioning as maybe our other ones, right? And so we can think of the sixth house as like, this is a part of our bodies that we need to take extra care of, right? Make sure that we give them a little extra love because they can go wrong a little. It's a little easier for them to go wrong, right? And so we can be proactive. We don't have to think about it as like, oh, if I have whatever on my sixth house, I'm going to get whatever disease. It's not how to think about it. It's more of like, this is the area I need to protect a little bit more because it's kind of my Achilles heel. But then as far as endometriosis, since it occurs in the pelvic area, that's the 8th house of a natal chart and the pelvic and reproductive area of the body. So we also look at the 8th house, which rules the genitals and the reproductive system and the pelvic area in general. Interestingly, the 8th house also, in the way I practice, is associated with chronic diseases, like the diseases that last longer. Traditionally, the 8th house is the house of death. Again, that can be kind of a freak out word to say, like, oh my God, if I have something in the 8th house, I'm going to die. No, that's not. a whole spiel here about, medical treatment a long time ago didn't used to be as effective as it was, and people could die more easily from things that now are more preventable. So maybe in the past, when there was an eighth house component, someone might have died. Whereas today, they get treatment and it just becomes like a chronic condition that you have to live with, but it's still kind of a chronic source of stress and pain, even though it doesn't necessarily cause death per se. There's a whole long speech I could give about that, but just kind of an overview. So lots of things to think about astrologically. So now, okay, let's get into this. Let's look at your specific chart, Grace, and we're going to see how all of those components might be affected for you. So for those listening, Grace's natal chart is March 24th, 1998 at 11:23 a.m. in Canton, Ohio. And we have a 7-degree Cancer rising, 15-degree Pisces midheaven. And then I'm just going to go around the chart. Let's see, we have the moon at 15 degrees Aquarius in the 8th house, Venus at 17 degrees Aquarius, also in the 8th house, North Node at 10 degrees Pisces, Jupiter at 11 degrees Pisces, midheaven at 15 Pisces. So we've got that grouping there of, or no, this is not North Node, this is South Node. South Node at 10 degrees Pisces, sorry. South Node 10 Pisces, Jupiter 11 Pisces, and midheaven 15 Pisces. So they're all grouped there together at the top of the chart. Sun at 3 degrees Aries in the 10th house, Mars 15 degrees Aries, 10th house, Saturn 20 degrees Aries, and Mercury 20 degrees Aries. Okay, so that's your chart. And the first thing I notice, actually, you know what? Let's back up and start with a wide lens. I said 6th house, kind of in general rules, it's the house of illness, but kind of just our areas that we're weaker in, right? Disease in general. So your 6th house is, now I use the Regiomontana's house system for medical readings, and I have the cusp of the 6th house at 5 degrees Sagittarius. And so, of course, Sagittarius is ruled by Jupiter. And so the Jupiterian systems of your body are points of vulnerability that you need to be careful about and guard against. And Jupiter rules the liver and the lungs. Now, the liver is really interesting because it's extremely important in our hormonal system. It processes our hormones. It makes sure that they're transitioning from one, because hormones go through like a life cycle, and that happens in the liver. They have to transition from one form to another. So the liver is really, really important in hormonal functioning. In your chart, Jupiter is in its home sign of Pisces, so that's helpful. We have a, kind of a strong signature here. But as I mentioned, it's conjoining the South Node and the midheaven. So the South Node is about like draining and kind of really low points, whereas the midheaven, of course, it's above us in the sky. It's the highest point of the chart. And so what does that look like to me? This looks like wild fluctuations between too low and too high. It's like if our liver is supposed to keep an equilibrium of our hormonal levels, it's like it can't keep up. It's like, okay, work really hard and I get it all caught up, but then I go too far and now I've got too much of it. And then I get like kind of behind on things and now everything is low. That's kind of what it looks like to me astrologically. It's like, whoa, too low, too high, too low, too high. It's hard to kind of find that equilibrium. All right, so that's the 6th house. Just again, really wide lens. We want to talk about the liver. I'll go more into the liver later when we talk about like natural approaches to this and how can we nourish our body. But next, I said endometriosis is probably primarily a lunar disease. So let's look at the moon. And look at this. We see moon conjunct Venus in the 8th house. Bam. I mean, the moon is the endothelial cells. Right? Sorry, what?
I said all the things that you talked about.
Yeah. Yeah.
So funny that like every point you made, I have that signature in my chart.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, moon is endothelial cells. Uterus is Venus. 8th house rules the reproductive system. And another really kind of interesting thing is that the Moon-Venus conjunction is on the cusp of the ninth house, so it's like right between houses. And we're looking at a disease that grows on the edges of organs, like boundaries of thing. I don't know, that might just be a coincidence, but it looks to me kind of like there's issues with the boundaries of things. Like it's not in the right boundary of where it's supposed to be. But yeah, this is all in Aquarius, which is ruled by Saturn. And the Moon and Venus both apply to Saturn. So they're applying by sextile to their dispositor, Saturn. And I mentioned that there's like an immune system component to this. And Saturn is about boundaries, and Saturn is about healthy boundaries and a healthy version of self and not self. But Saturn in this chart is kind of weak because it's in fallen Aries. So Saturn kind of struggles to get a proper expression of the way it needs to be. But since it's so strong, being in the 10th house and dispositing the Moon and Venus, we can see kind of energetic issues here, right? And also really interesting, Saturn is exactly conjoined Mercury. That's a really cool signature. Probably not as much applicable to endometriosis, but I just think that's pretty neat. Let's see what else. Let me look at my notes here. So blockages, boundaries, problems with things being where they're not supposed to be, right? So I think this looks like, this looks like an endometriosis chart. And again, I don't want to say this as like, oh, if you have these things, you're definitely going to get a disease. This is just how it happened to manifest for you in your life. But I don't want to scare anyone out there like, oh my God, I'm doomed, right? I don't think anybody's doomed. I think what happens is that we need to look at these energies and understand them and see how we can work with them to nourish our bodies and kind of come to a more balanced and healthful place, if that makes sense. How does that sound so far?
It sounds very accurate. Again, like I said, I'm an astrologer too, so I've already made some connotations, and your notes match up with mine. I was over here kind of chuckling because, like I said, like every signature you said of endometriosis, I kind of have, and I was like, wow, astrology is so literal. It's fun. It's funny. It's funny.
Yeah, it's really amazing. I tell my friends, if I ever stop being amazed at astrology, like slap me in the face, because
every day I'm amazed.
Yeah.
Every day. Nobody sees this to amaze me.
This shouldn't work, but it does. It's just like, what?
I tell people that every day. So funny.
Yeah. So, I don't like to, like I said, I don't like to send a message like, oh, you're doomed. That's because you have this chart. You're stuck to deal with this forever. No, I think the way that we use the chart is greater understanding of the energies involved, so that we can intelligently work with these energies to find balance and health, right? And I'm coming from an herbalist tradition. I've been trained in herbalism. And so that's kind of the approach that I take to these issues. And I have to say, I try to make this statement as often as possible. Herbalists are not doctors. We can't treat things. I cannot give medical advice. I don't want to give medical advice. That's not my lane, right? So what herbalists can do is kind of similar to what astrologers can do, is kind of help you find the energies that are happening in your life and provide ideas for working with them and provide ways to nourish yourself and try to find, kind of a healthier balance in your life. I hope you are enjoying the See by Starlight podcast. To enable me to continue producing this show, please join my subscription. You can get exclusive members-only articles, including a monthly herbal recipe, a bonus podcast episode each month, insider updates on my research projects, and much more. Plus, get the chance to ask me anything. Don't miss out. Subscribe today through the link in the show notes. Another thing I need to say for the record, any condition is going to be highly personal. Endometriosis isn't the same for everybody, right? It manifests differently for different people. And something that will work for one person might not work for the next person because the energies are different in their bodies, even though they technically have the same quote unquote disease or condition, right? And it takes, you need to have a long and detailed personal history to develop like an in-depth plan for managing your individual symptoms, right? So I'm not here to say like, oh, if you have endometriosis, take this herb and everything will be better. I can't do that. That's not how it works, right? What we do is look at you individually and go really in depth with your life, what's going on, like not just with your diet and your stress levels and things like that, but also where do you live, where you at socially, spiritually, all these kinds of things. So in this podcast, it's probably best to keep things at kind of a high level and just talk about, let's start with nourishing your body. Based on your astrological chart, what kinds of things could help your body just in kind of maybe a more general way that will sort of trickle down to your endometriosis symptoms, because everything is connected. Does that make sense?
Yes, definitely.
Okay. Let's start with your rising sign, Cancer. Cancer rules the stomach, and the moon, the ruler of Cancer, also rules the stomach. And the stomach, believe it or not, this is going to sound weird, the stomach is the starting point for the hormonal system. It's a weird thing to say, but it's true. And especially for Cancer rising, because when we have Cancer rising, our stomach is going to be especially sensitive, right? Why do I say that? Okay. It's kind of a domino thing. The stomach is where certain key nutrients like vitamin D, vitamin B, and iron especially begin to be assimilated and sent to the bloodstream. Okay, and these nutrients are building blocks for the production of hormones. So if these nutrients are in the bloodstream in adequate levels, when they reach the organs where whichever hormone is being produced, so like with estrogen, for example, it's primarily the ovaries creates estrogen for the body. It's got to have all of those nutrients in the bloodstream to have the building blocks that it needs to create those hormones. If it doesn't have adequate supply of these nutrients, when it creates the hormones, they're going to be a little bit weird. They're going to, they might not have all the pieces that they're supposed to have. It's like, okay, here's an estrogen cell. It's good enough, go out there, but it's going to have some, right? It's going to have some issues. If that makes sense. And so if your stomach is not properly assimilating the hormones or assimilating the nutrients, then your hormonal system is going to kind of start getting jacked up. And then that creates sort of a negative spiral, because the hormones do billions of things in the body that we need, right? So let's start with the stomach. What happens with a lot of people, especially women, for some reason, again, they're not really sure why, but women tend to be more prone to this condition where the cell lining of the stomach gets disrupted, and it causes the gastric cells to behave more like intestinal cells. And that's a problem because the gastric cells need to do certain things like absorb these nutrients that we use later on. We're not entirely sure why this happens. Some people think that it's like a bacterial thing. It's definitely also related to stress. But for whatever reason, if the gastric cells get disrupted, then we're starting that domino chain of, okay, then we have inadequate nutrition, and then we have inadequate production of the hormones, and then, oh my God, the hormones aren't working right. So absorption of nutrients from the stomach is extremely important. So one thing to start with, and I hate giving this advice because everybody hates it. I hate it. I don't love it. But figuring out what foods you're sensitive to is really crucial. It's a huge pain. Now, in the natural world, a lot of times they talk about food allergies and getting rid of your allergies. And that word gets used really loosely and causes a lot of confusion because technically, like medically speaking, an allergy is something that your body produces like IgG cells against, like a certain allergic response. But not all foods are going to produce that response, but that doesn't mean that we are necessarily like energetically vibing with those foods, if that makes sense. So for example, whenever I eat squash, I get indigestion, like really bad. Like I get a really bad stomach ache. For some reason, my body can't process something in squash. So I just don't eat squash. I don't think I'm allergic to squash. Like if I took an allergy test, I don't think I would get like an IgG response to it. But I know for me personally, I just can't like digest it, if that makes sense. So when we talk about food allergies, it's kind of all of those things, like foods that are problematic for us for whatever reason. It's gonna give us a stomach ache. It's gonna cause like low level problems with absorption and things like that. So I always cringe. I'm like, maybe you should try to eliminate food allergies, because I know everyone's like, no, don't touch my food.
That's how I said that. I didn't say that outside, but I said that outside.
I know. I know. It's a big pain, but it can be really worth it to like figure out what foods work for you and what foods don't. And we are just so like, we're so out of touch with our bodies in today's society. Like we just eat what's there and what makes us feel good. And we don't actually like realize that I actually don't feel good when I eat this, you know? And sometimes it takes like a day or two for it to even kick in. So you're not even sure what the trigger is, you know? Like I know somebody who they get a bad reaction to peas, but it occurs like the day after they eat peas. And it's like, she had to like do a lot of testing to kind of, or like trial and error to figure out what the heck is wrong. Why do I get these rashes? And like, oh, like she finally did like a kind of an elimination thing and figured out it's peas. Oh, geez. Okay, so she doesn't eat peas. So I'm sorry, but especially people with Cancer rising or anybody with like a moon that is sensitive in some way in a key position in the chart. Let's talk about the food. Let's talk about what we're putting into the stomach. Now there's like the easy way and let's put it, there's a slow way and the fast way to do this. The fast way is like ripping off the Band-Aid. You cut your diet down to like a Whole30 diet where you'd cut out all grains and all sugars and all alcohol, like everything except like super basic stuff. That is hard and rough, but it's the fastest way, because you do that for a month and then you like start introducing some of the big ones like gluten, wait a few days and see what happens with your body. Then you introduce another one. And like that's kind of the fastest way to rip off the Band-Aid. It's also the hardest because like, I don't want to live without my bread. What are you talking about?
My bread, rice, pasta. Oh my God.
No. I get it. So this is the kind of thing where it might be easier to work with like a health coach, to like have someone there with you. Like, okay, this week we're going to do this and I'm going to cry with you. And I know how painful it is and I hate it too. But once we figure this out, then we'll know like maybe bread actually isn't an issue for you. You know, like maybe you can eat bread. Great. Yes. And you can figure all that out. What?
I said, I hope that's the case.
Yeah. And another thing that I offer as a point of hope to people is like, once you find your triggers, there are ways to like kind of de-trigger your body. There is a technique called NAET, and it stands for Nabudrapad, I think is her name. It's an Indian name. It's a doctor from India. Allergy elimination technique.
Okay.
And I have seen amazing results with that. So like once you identify your food triggers, a lot of times you can kind of deprogram them as being triggers. It doesn't work for every single thing, but it works for a lot of things. And so that's a point of hope. Like, don't be too depressed about like, oh, I'm never going to be able to eat chocolate again or whatever. Maybe you can, you know, we'll take it out of the diet for a while, see how your body reacts. And if it's like, oh, wow, my pain is like 2 points lower, what? Then maybe you can try that technique to see if you can introduce it into your body again. Anyway, so there's some hope out there. It's not necessarily permanent, but it is kind of a process. So that's one thing. Also, the obvious stuff, like we all know that junk food is bad for us, right? Like, there is no world in which Doritos are going to be something that is good for our body. Doritos are not food. They're like pure chemical concoction. So even if you are not at the place in life where you have the cushion to be like, okay, I'm gonna do a full elimination diet. There is still like, okay, I'll cut out the Doritos and the ho-hos and whatever stuff, and see how that helps, because it does affect the stomach, and like I said, the whole issue with the stomach. Now, there's a really amazing thing about the stomach. So the moon rules the stomach, right? And the moon is considered a moist planet. It rules water, and the stomach has to be moist for it to work properly. It needs a layer of mucus on the inside of it to function properly. And this mucus layer, it's not just like it's not just to like like people always talk about it as it just prevents the tissues of your stomach from getting burned by the stomach acid. And that's true, but it does a whole lot more than that. It's extremely important. It also blocks bacteria from getting to those stomach cells. Remember I said that disruption of the stomach cells that kind of causes them to mutate into intestinal cells instead of gastric cells. They think there might be a bacterial component to that. So if your mucosal lining in your stomach isn't thick enough, there might be bacteria getting through and causing like weird mutations in your stomach cells. Extremely important. Also, the mucus lining of your stomach helps you absorb nutrients better. It creates like a soft, welcoming environment for the nutrients from your food. It's like, yes, come in, my babies, come in. We're just gonna enter these cells and get into the bloodstream, and it's gonna be wonderful. Just come, it allows them to be processed properly. And the mucus lining of the stomach actually communicates with your immune system to regulate inflammation. Is that like not mind-blowing? Like what? So
it's connected.
And it's amazing because they've been using the metaphor of water for thousands of years as like the opposite of fire, right? And then we see like inflammation is fire, mucus is water, and they are like balancing each other out. Like what? Every time I come across something like this, I'm just like, this is incredible. Sorry, I'm nerding out here. But yeah, so the mucosal lining is really important. It's affected by stress. So who among us does not have constant stress every single day, right? Like we all probably have damage to the mucosal linings of our stomachs, but especially Cancer risings. I'm also a Cancer rising. Like our stomach is like, you get the butterflies in your stomach, or like it's kind of the first thing to go in a way. It's like you have to be really protective of your stomach. So one thing you can do is a daily tea of herbal mucosal help, right? So slimy herbs. Marshmallow root is usually the first one that herbalists call on. You put it in water in the fridge, and the next day it's like a big jar of snot. It's like herbal mucus. And I know that sounds disgusting, but it's actually really, really good for you. And it provides the lining on your stomach that if your body is struggling to create it itself because of stress and bacteria and all the things, you can kind of give it to the stomach to help support it. I know that the way I described it made it sound really unappetizing, but I promise it's not so bad. So what you can do is get some marshmallow root, soak it in water overnight, and then mix it with some cinnamon and some honey and some lemon juice. And then whatever flavors you want, mix it with some juice or whatever, and drink it before a meal, like twice a day, before lunch, before supper. Just do that every day for 3 months. See what happens. Just try it. Just see what happens. Because it's going to have, like I said, the stomach is where the first domino of that whole process begins. And so if you nourish your stomach and the absorption of your food and your nutrients and all that kind of stuff, boom, one domino falls, the next domino, the next domino, the next, and it goes on from there. Okay, so that's a lot about the stomach. Another important aspect of your chart is the ruler of the sixth house, Jupiter, which rules the liver. And the liver is also extremely important in the hormonal system. Like I said, it kind of makes sure that the hormones transition from one state to the other. When they reach the end of their life, the liver's job is to kind of shut them down and send them to our waste system. If it can't do that properly, they end up recirculating in the blood and they become inflammatory and all kinds of problems. So liver is really important. Now, it's a whole deep subject like anything else, but let's keep it simple. Let's think about do's and don'ts, right? What to add and what to take out. So adding some foods that are really amazing and wonderful for the liver are beets, fresh figs, and burdock root. Now you can get that at Asian food stores. It's called gobo root. And you just use it and just put it in food like a vegetable, like put it in a soup or, heat it and eat it, add some butter or whatever. And then if you have access to dandelions, like if you have a yard or if someone has a yard where there are dandelions growing, dandelion root is amazing for the liver. You can get dandelion root tea, like at a health food store or something. The thing is, they usually roast it because it makes it taste better. It makes it taste like coffee, and it's kind of like a coffee substitute. But when you roast it, it kind of removes some of those aspects of like being helpful for it. It's not bad for you. It's still good.
But dried dandelion root give that same effect?
Yes. If it's if it's not roasted, if it's just dried.
Okay. Because I actually have some downstairs. That's why I was wondering. And that's something that's interesting. I've tried to concoct like herbal teas and stuff to help with the daily cramps. Like, of course, when I'm on my cycle, I drink like raspberry leaf and stuff. So that's interesting. That's why I'm kind of excited because I have some of this stuff already.
That is awesome. That's great. Now, also, just being the approach that I'm taking is like big picture. This isn't going to be immediate relief. It's going to be like do this for 3 months and see how you feel. And so it'll be important, like maybe after this meeting, get a piece of paper and like write down all of your symptoms and like try to like numerically score, like how's my pain in general, how's my sleep, how's my stress, how's my skin, just kind of do a full body scan of where you are. And then do this stuff and then come back to it in 3 months and see, like, have I improved on it? Because we often don't remember, where we are is like where we are. And we don't remember, oh, actually, I was kind of worse 3 months ago. This is helping. Or it's not helping, that kind of thing. It's not like immediate pain relief. It's going to be a kind of a slower, we're nourishing the body here. But you should also notice a difference. I'm not saying like it's going to be a whole year. You should probably slowly, gradually notice an effect within a few weeks. Especially like if you're getting indigestion, for example, stomach ache, having that marshmallow root tea, you might notice an immediate effect.
Yeah.
Right? So, but yeah. And then as far as subtracting, some foods are really hard on the liver. Obviously, alcohol, really hard on the liver. Try to bring that down. Like, I actually can't drink alcohol at all. I also have Jupiter on the 6th house. And it triggers my migraines. So like I can't even drink alcohol.
Yeah, I don't feel the best when I drink, to be honest.
Yeah, it's a pretty strong. It's hard on the liver. It's very hard on the liver. And so those of us with extra sensitive livers, gotta be careful. Another one that is kind of everywhere and harder to get rid of is fructose.
Okay.
It's real tough on the liver, and it's everywhere. And also, like agave nectar, I was told that's a health food, right? So I was putting agave nectar in everything thinking, oh, this is actually good for me. It's actually pure fructose. And so like I was actually hurting my liver thinking this was a health food. So I noticed a huge difference just in cutting out agave nectar. Like I just replaced it with honey or sugar.
Yeah.
And whoa. Like within a week, my pain levels were already much lower. It was like my liver was like, "Thank you, stop sending that to me." And then another real big one is the like fake oils, the hydrogenated oils, the basically they process it to make it more shelf stable, but it makes
Isn't that why everybody says to not use like seed oils?
yeah,
Okay.
it's kind of going around the I guess trendy world right now. Seed oils are bad. It's true. Seed oils are tough on the liver, and that's one reason why. So you can replace it with olive oil, butter, bacon grease. Some people are gonna be like, no, but actually bacon grease is okay as an oil used, with cooking or whatever, things like that. I also noticed a dramatic difference when I switched out my oils, like my cooking oils.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then if you want to take a supplement, there's a really good one made by Gaia. It's like they make supplements, and it's called Liver Health. Just do that
Okay.
daily to kind of, you know, sometimes like drinking tea every day can be a sort of like, oh, I'm so sick of this tea, I'm tired of this. So maybe a supplement, you go on and off between the supplements and the tea and whatever, and kind of see how that works for you. What do you think?
I think that this was definitely beneficial. Like I've been over here, I've been typing away at my oh, you can't even see it, but I've been typing away on my phone, making some notes because I'm definitely, and it's so funny because a lot of the stuff that you're saying is stuff that I know that I need to be doing and stuff that I've been trying to implement. So more so of just some confirmation that I'm on the right track, but I need to keep going.
Yeah. Well, and the thing about like the health world is that it's really overwhelming. You can't do it all. Like all the things that they say are good for you, you're like, but then I would never have a life, right? So the way that astrology can help us with that is like we can look at our chart and see what is probably the most important things for us to focus on, right? So looking at your first house and looking at your sixth house is a great place to start. So it's like, okay, I know that my liver is maybe weaker than it could be, or it struggles a little bit more than maybe other people's livers do. So of all of the things to pick, I'm gonna be extra careful and like put my arms around my liver and be like, okay, I'm gonna protect you, with diet. I can't cut out everything. I can't do all the things that they say to do, but I can do liver stuff, right? Or I can do stomach stuff and start from there. And the nice thing about it is that everything is connected. So your stomach gets happier, and then you see this downstream effect. Your liver gets happier, you see this downstream effect. And then it creates sort of a network so that if you are harder on other parts of your body, okay, well, I've strengthened my liver, so I got you, babe,
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. So that's what I've got. That's what I've got.
Thank you so much. This was so helpful.
Awesome. Thank you. And I was going to look at the surgery too, but I ran out of time. So
Yeah, not a problem.
so yeah, if you want to keep in touch, let me know how it goes. Be
Yes.
happy to hear, what how you end up feeling. And this was fun looking at
Goodness.
body stuff. Great.
It's so nice to, of course, being an astrologer, I look at my chart all day and night. It's nice to hear somebody else look at my chart, and especially from a different perspective, because again, I'm not well versed in anything medical. So this was pretty cool.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it's fun for me too, and it's so nice to meet you. And good luck. And
Yes.
I hope
Thank you so much.
to talk again sometime in the future.
Yes, yes. Have a great rest of your day.
You too. Take care.